The chandelier lights flickered as silence swallowed the grand hall. Jabari froze mid-step, because standing across the room was McKenna, the woman he had abandoned, the woman he left pregnant and broken 10 years ago. But she wasn't broken. She stood tall, elegant, untouchable, dressed like royalty, eyes cold, unfamiliar, and beside her a young boy, no older than 10. The boy turned slightly, and Jabari's breath caught. That face. Those eyes. It was like staring into a mirror of his past. His blood ran cold. Because in that moment, one terrifying truth hit him. He had never escaped his past. It had been growing, watching, waiting, and now it was standing right in front of him. If you were in Jabari's place, would you walk toward them or turn away forever? And tell me, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it in your country? If you love emotional stories with powerful twists like this, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us until the end, because this story is only getting started. 10 years earlier, long before the crystal chandeliers, the polished marble floors, and the expensive silence of the Gala Jabari, was still a man hungry enough to mistake ambition for wisdom. Back then, he lived with McKenna in a narrow, rented flat above a noisy row of shops in Nairobi. The walls were thin. The plumbing groaned at night. When it rained, water gathered near the window and crept in like an uninvited guest. But McKenna had a way of making hardship feel temporary. She folded their cheap curtains with care. She kept fresh flowers in old glass jars. She laughed with her whole body, as though joy itself were a kind of rebellion. She was 6 months pregnant when the cracks truly began to show. Not in the apartment, in Jabari. At first, his restlessness looked harmless. It arrived as silence at dinner, as distracted nods, as longer hours away from home, as sudden irritation whenever McKenna spoke about the baby, the budget, or the future. "We need to start thinking about hospital fees," McKenna said one evening, smoothing one hand over the curve of her stomach, while stirring a pot of lentils with the other. And the landlord asked again about next month. Jabari sat at the table staring at his phone. "I said I'm handling it." Her voice softened. "I know. I'm only saying we should plan together." That should have comforted him. Instead, it made something sharp twist inside his chest. Together. The word felt heavier than it should have. He heard it not as partnership, but as pressure, responsibility, weight. A future closing around him before he had become the man he believed he deserved to be. McKenna turned off the stove and sat across from him. "You've been far away lately. I'm right here." "No," she said gently. "You're not." He looked up, then eyes tired, jaw tight. "Do you know what it feels like to wake up every day and know you're meant for more, but every road is blocked?" McKenna held his gaze. "I know what it feels like to build with someone before the blessing comes." He almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. McKenna believed in seasons, in patience, in honest work that ripened over time. Jabari believed in acceleration. He wanted doors kicked open, not slowly unlocked. He wanted wealth before wisdom, reward before endurance. And as the months passed, that hunger made him easy prey. The first time he met Zuri was at a hotel lounge, where he had gone hoping to impress a potential investor who never arrived. Zuri did. She was seated alone near the bar, dressed in white silk, with diamond studs that caught the amber light every time she tilted her head. Men looked at her. Women noticed her. But it was not merely beauty that set her apart. It was control. Zuri carried herself like someone who had never once begged life for anything. When Jabari accidentally brushed past her table after receiving yet another humiliating cancellation call, she glanced at the papers in his hand. "A business proposal?" she asked. He hesitated. Something like that. Sit, she said, as if she were giving an order the world would naturally obey. He should have walked away. Instead, he sat. She asked questions, smart ones, ruthless ones, questions McKenna never asked, because McKenna still saw the wounded dreamer in him. Zuri saw the craving beneath the dream. She noticed how quickly he straightened when speaking about expansion capital market entry logistics branding. She saw the fire in him. Then she fed it. "You're wasting yourself," she said after 15 minutes. "Men like you do not belong in cramped apartments worrying about grocery money." The sentence landed like prophecy. Jabari did not tell her about McKenna that night. Not at first. He simply accepted the expensive drink she ordered for him and listened as she spoke about opportunity elite circles, old money, and the brutal truth that the world respected results more than loyalty. "The poor are always taught patience," Zuri said. "It keeps them obedient." Jabari tried to smile, but something in him had already leaned toward her. Over the next weeks, their encounters became frequent, then intentional. Zuri invited him to meetings he had no business attending. She introduced him to men who spoke in millions and women who wore influence like perfume. She made him feel visible, chosen, elevated. Each time he returned home to McKenna's warm eyes and practical worries, the small apartment seemed smaller. The smell of cooking seemed heavier. The tenderness that once steadied him began to feel in his corrupted mind like limitation. McKenna sensed the shift before she understood it. He stopped touching her belly when the baby kicked. He stopped asking if she had eaten. He began taking phone calls outside. Once late at night, she woke and found him standing by the window, lit only by the blue glow of his screen. "Who are you talking to?" she whispered. He locked the phone too quickly. "No one." McKenna sat up slowly. "Jabari." He turned impatient already. "What now?" The words hit her harder than a slap. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, as though protecting not only the child, but the fragile remains of her dignity. "What happened to you?" she asked. He exhaled sharply. "Nothing happened. I'm tired." "No." Something changed. He walked away from the window. "Maybe I finally opened my eyes." She stared at him. "To what?" "To the fact that this—" He gestured at the room, the peeling paint, the second-hand furniture, the life they had tried to bless with hope. "This is not enough." McKenna's eyes filled, but her voice remained steady. "It's not enough for you now, because you've started measuring life with someone else's ruler." He said nothing. That silence was answer enough. The next morning, McKenna found a receipt in his trouser pocket from a luxury restaurant they could never afford. 2 meals, imported wine, dessert. When he returned that evening, she was waiting at the table, the receipt laid between them like evidence in a courtroom. "Who is she?" McKenna asked. Jabari's face hardened instantly. "You went through my things. Who is she?" He laughed once, cold and humorless. "So that's what this is now." McKenna stood, one hand braced against the table. "I am carrying your child. I deserve the truth." His eyes flicked to her stomach, then away. That tiny movement broke something in her. "There is someone," he said at last. "But you're making it bigger than it is." McKenna swallowed. "Bigger than what?" "Bigger than betrayal? Bigger than leaving your pregnant wife alone while you entertain another woman?" "Don't use that tone with me. Then give me a reason not to." For a moment they stood facing each other, breathing hard, 2 people separated now by more than anger. Pride had entered the room. So had shame. And once those 2 sit at the same table, love rarely survives untouched. Jabari rubbed his temples. "You don't understand the kind of life I'm being offered." McKenna almost smiled through the pain, but it was the smile of someone watching a person she loves walk willingly into fire. A life, she said. Or a price. He looked at her, then truly looked, and instead of seeing the woman who had stood beside him through failed deals, unpaid rent, and humiliating setbacks, he saw inconvenience, need, delay. That was the ugliest part of betrayal. It did not begin with leaving. It began with dehumanizing the person who loved you. "She believes in me," he said. McKenna's voice trembled. "I believed in you when nobody knew your name." "That's exactly the problem," he snapped. "Belief doesn't build empires. Money does. Access does. Power does." The room went still. Outside, a motorcycle roared past. Somewhere downstairs, a radio crackled with distant music. Life continued, as though a sacred thing had not just been shattered. McKenna lowered herself into the chair, not because she wanted to, but because the baby pressed hard, and sudden pain seized her lower back. Jabari noticed and hesitated. For 1 second, just one, the old version of him returned. He took a step toward her. "Are you okay?" McKenna raised a hand to stop him. Tears slid down, but she did not wipe them away. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't touch me if your heart is already gone." He stood still. Then his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. "Zuri." McKenna saw the name, saw the answer before he spoke. He picked up his jacket. That sound, the scrape of fabric, the lift of the hanger, the movement of someone preparing to leave would live inside McKenna's memory longer than his words ever would. "You're leaving?" she asked, disbelief hollowing out her voice. "I need time. You need time." Her laugh this time was broken, stunned. "I need a husband. Your child needs a father." He opened the door. "Jabari," she said, and now her voice cracked wide open. "If you walk out tonight, you will destroy something you may never rebuild." He did not answer, because some men, when standing at the edge of their moral collapse, mistake warning for manipulation. He stepped into the corridor. McKenna rose too fast, pain shooting through her body. "Jabari." He turned only halfway. Her tears were no longer quiet. Was any of it real? The question pierced deeper than accusation. It was the question every betrayed heart eventually asks. Was I loved, or only used until something shinier appeared? Jabari should have gone back. He should have crossed the room, taken her face in his hands, and chosen the woman who had chosen him when he was nobody. But ambition poisoned by vanity is one of the cruelest blindnesses on earth. He looked at McKenna with a face she would never forget, and said the words that would haunt him for the next 10 years. "You were real," he said, "but you were never enough." Then he left. The door shut. And in the silence after it, McKenna's world did not explode. It collapsed quietly, which was worse, because quiet pain has room to echo. She stood there for several seconds, unable to breathe properly, one hand on the table, the other gripping her belly, as if she could shield the child from hearing what had just happened. Then the first cramp hit, sharp, violent, terrifying. She gasped. Another followed. Below her, warm liquid began to spread. McKenna looked down, horror flooding her face. And suddenly, abandonment was no longer just heartbreak. It was danger. McKenna was still on the floor when the second wave of pain hit. It tore through her body like something unforgiving, something primal. Her fingers clawed at the cold tiles as her breath came in shallow bursts. The room spun. The silence pressed in. "Help," she whispered, but her voice was too weak, swallowed by the walls that had just witnessed her world collapse. Another contraction. Stronger. Her vision blurred. In that moment, it wasn't the betrayal that terrified her most. It was the thought that her child might not survive it. She forced herself to move inch by inch, dragging her body toward the door. Her knees scraped against the floor. Her hand left faint streaks as she pulled herself forward. Every second felt like a fight she was losing. Then a knock. Soft at first, then louder. "Makana, it's Mama and Jerry from downstairs." McKenna tried to answer, but only a broken sound escaped her throat. The door creaked open. Mama and Jerry stood frozen for half a heartbeat as she took in the scene. McKenna collapsed, pale, trembling, the unmistakable sign of blood pooling beneath her. "Oh God, child." Within seconds, everything moved at once. Voices, hands, urgency. McKenna barely remembered being lifted, barely remembered the frantic ride in a neighbor's car, the blur of streetlights passing above her like distant stars. But she remembered one thing. Jabari wasn't there. Hours later, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital, McKenna lay still, her body exhausted, her soul hollowed out. The doctor's voice came and went like distant thunder. "You were lucky." Another hour and lucky. The word felt almost cruel, because survival in that moment did not feel like victory. It felt like being forced to keep going when everything inside you had already shattered. A nurse placed a small bundle beside her. McKenna turned her head slowly. There he was, tiny, fragile, alive, her son. Tears slipped silently down her temples as she stared at him. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, touching his cheek as if afraid he might disappear. "You stayed," she whispered. And just like that, something shifted. Not healing, not yet, but purpose. Days passed, then weeks. McKenna left the hospital with nothing but a child in her arms and a silence where her husband used to be. She did not call Jabari, not because she didn't want answers, but because some truths once revealed do not need confirmation. Still, life has a cruel way of forcing closure. 3 weeks later, McKenna received a message. From an unknown number. Her heart pounded as she opened it. A video file. Her hands shook as she pressed play. At first it looked like nothing, just a dimly lit room. Then Jabari appeared on screen. Her breath caught. He was sitting across from Zuri, laughing, relaxed, alive in a way he had not been with her for months. McKenna's chest tightened. But then the video shifted. The angle changed. The tone changed. And suddenly everything changed. Zuri leaned forward, her voice low, controlled. "You handled her well," she said. Jabari smirked faintly. "It wasn't that hard." McKenna's stomach twisted. Handled, Zuri picked up a phone, scrolling lazily. "You saw the messages I showed you. That woman was already planning to trap you." Jabari frowned slightly. "You're sure they were real?" Zuri's lips curved. Cold. Calculated. "Do you really think I would risk everything on something uncertain?" A pause. Then she laughed. Soft, sharp, cruel. "Of course they weren't real, Jabari." The world stopped. McKenna stopped breathing. On the screen, Jabari stiffened. What Zuri tilted her head, amused by his reaction. The messages, the photos, the evidence. All fabricated silence. Heavy. Explosive. "You said," Jabari's voice cracked. "You said the child wasn't mine." Zuri leaned back, completely at ease. "I said what you needed to hear." McKenna's fingers tightened around the edge of the bed. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. On the video, Jabari stood up abruptly. "Why would you do that?" Zuri's expression didn't change. "Because you were wasting yourself," she said simply. "Living in that small life, with a woman who could never elevate you." "That woman is my wife," he snapped. Zuri's eyes flashed. Was she corrected? "And don't pretend you didn't already want to leave. I only gave you a reason that made it easier." The words hit like bullets. McKenna felt something inside her crack open, not from pain, from clarity. Back in the video, Jabari ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. "You lied to me," he said. Zuri shrugged. "I guided you. You made me abandon my child. You chose ambition." She replied sharply. "Don't rewrite your own decisions just to feel better." Another silence. But this one was different. This one was dangerous, because truth once exposed does not quietly sit in the corner. It demands reckoning. McKenna's vision blurred with tears, but she didn't look away. She couldn't. Because for the first time since that night, she saw the full picture. Jabari had betrayed her. Yes, but not from certainty, from manipulation, from weakness, from a lie. The video ended abruptly. The screen went black. McKenna sat there frozen, the phone still in her hand, her mind struggling to process what she had just seen. Then a new message appeared. From the same number. "You deserve to know the truth. No name, no explanation. Just that." McKenna stared at the words. Her heart raced again, but differently this time. Not from fear, from awakening. For weeks she had lived inside a story where she was abandoned because she was not enough. Now that story shattered, because the truth was far more complicated, more painful, and strangely, more empowering. She had not been rejected for who she was. She had been caught in a web of someone else's deception. McKenna looked down at her son, at Kato, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. Her expression slowly changed. The tears stopped. Her breathing steadied. Something else took its place. Resolve. "I will not raise you in the shadow of a lie," she whispered. Her voice was no longer broken. It was quiet, but firm. "I will not let his weakness define our future." She wiped her face, lifted her chin, and in that moment McKenna stopped being a victim. But somewhere else in the city, Jabari was sitting alone in a dark room, the same video playing again, and again, and again, each time cutting deeper, each time stripping away another layer of denial. His hands trembled, his eyes hollow, because the truth had finally reached him too, not gently, not mercifully, but completely. And now there was no escaping it. He had not just left McKenna, he had been led, but he had still chosen to follow. And that was a guilt no lie could erase. What neither of them knew yet was that the person who sent that video, the one who had been watching everything from the shadows, had only just begun to reveal the truth. And when the rest came to light, it would change everything. The city did not pause for McKenna's pain. Morning still came with its usual noise vendors calling out prices, buses coughing smoke into crowded streets, radios playing songs about love that suddenly felt like lies. Life moved forward indifferent, relentless. McKenna learned quickly, because she had no choice. The first month was survival, not healing, not understanding, just survival. Her body still ached from childbirth. Her nights were broken into fragments of sleep between Kato's cries. Milk stains marked her only clean dress. Hunger came often quietly, like an unwelcome guest she could not send away. She had no savings, no husband, and no family willing to take her back. When she showed up at her parents' home 3 days after leaving the hospital, Kato wrapped tightly against her chest. Her mother did not open the door fully. "You made your choice," her mother said, voice heavy but distant. "Now you must live with it." McKenna's lips trembled. "I didn't choose this." Her father stood behind the doorframe, arms crossed. "You chose him." The words closed the door more firmly than any physical force. McKenna stood there for a long time, not knocking again, not crying, just standing, until the weight of reality pushed her to turn away. She found work where she could, cleaning homes, washing clothes, carrying baskets of produce in the market, anything that paid even a little. Kato stayed tied to her back most days, his small body pressed against hers, his warmth the only constant comfort in a world that had turned cold. Sometimes when she bent over buckets of water, her back screaming in protest, she would whisper to him, "We will be okay." Not because she believed it, but because he needed her to. The nights were the hardest, not because of the crying, but because of the silence in between. That was when memories came. Jabari laughing, Jabari promising, Jabari leaving. And no matter how many times she replayed that night, she could never change the ending. You were never enough. The words echoed, over and over and over, until one night Kato stirred. McKenna looked down at him, his tiny fingers curled, searching, trusting, needing. And suddenly the words lost their power, because she realized something. It didn't matter if she had not been enough for Jabari. She was everything to this child. And that was enough to keep going. But strength does not erase exhaustion. It only delays collapse. 3 months later, under the scorching afternoon sun, McKenna's legs gave out. She had been carrying a heavy basket across the market for hours. Sweat soaked through her clothes, her vision blurred. Then darkness. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the market. The air was cooler, quieter, a ceiling above her, unfamiliar. She blinked slowly. "Easy," a calm voice said. McKenna turned her head. A man sat nearby, watching her, not with curiosity, not with pity, but with something steadier. Concern. He was well-dressed, but not flashy. His presence was composed, grounded. The kind of man who did not need to announce his importance for others to feel it. "Where?" McKenna whispered. "You fainted," he said. "I brought you here." Her eyes widened slightly. "My son. He's safe." McKenna's gaze snapped to the side. There, on a small couch, Kato lay sleeping peacefully, a thin cloth draped over him. Relief flooded her so quickly it almost hurt. "Thank you," she breathed. The man nodded once. "You haven't been eating properly." It wasn't a question. McKenna looked away. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just honest. "What's your name?" he asked after a moment. "McKenna." He studied her briefly, as if committing the name to memory. "Tunda," he said. McKenna expected questions. Judgment. Curiosity about her situation. But Tunde did none of that. Instead, he stood and walked toward a small table, returning with a glass of water and a plate of food. "Eat," he said simply. McKenna hesitated. Not because she didn't want to, but because accepting help had become something dangerous. Help often came with conditions, with expectations, with hidden costs. Tunda seemed to read her hesitation. "This is not charity," he said calmly. "It's timing." McKenna frowned slightly. "Timing. You needed help. I was there. That's all." Something in his tone made it hard to argue. Slowly, cautiously, McKenna took the plate. Her hands trembled as she ate. Not delicately, not politely, but like someone who had been holding back hunger for too long. Tunda said nothing. He simply sat there, giving her space. Days passed. McKenna expected that moment to be a one-time kindness, a brief intersection of lives. But Tunde returned. Not every day, not intrusively, just consistently. He brought small things, groceries, medicine, a better cloth for Kato, Once he even arranged for her to see a doctor without telling her until the appointment was already set. McKenna didn't understand. "Why are you doing this?" she asked one evening, unable to hold the question any longer. Tunda looked at Kato, who was asleep beside her. "Because someone should have helped you sooner." The answer was simple. Too simple. McKenna narrowed her eyes slightly. "You don't even know me." Tunda's gaze returned to her. "I know enough." Something in his voice made her pause. "Enough." "What?" He didn't answer immediately, and in that silence a subtle shift occurred, because for the first time McKenna felt it. There was something he wasn't saying. Weeks turned into months. With Tunda's help, McKenna's life began to stabilize. Not dramatically, not magically, but steadily. He encouraged her to learn new skills, helped her enroll in small business classes, introduced her carefully gradually to people who could open doors she didn't even know existed. McKenna worked harder than ever, not because she had to survive anymore, but because she refused to waste the opportunity she had been given. Every late night, every early morning, every sacrifice, she carried them with purpose. For Kato, for herself, for the version of her that had once been left behind on a cold floor. But even as her world began to rebuild, the question never left her. Why Tunda? Why her? And one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in deep orange, she finally asked again. "Tunda," she said quietly. He looked up. "How did you really know I needed help?" This time, he didn't look away, didn't deflect, didn't soften the truth. "I've been watching," he said. McKenna's breath caught. "What not you?" he added calmly. "Him." Her heart skipped. Jabari Tunda nodded. The air shifted instantly, heavy, charged, dangerous. McKenna's voice dropped. "Why would you watch him?" Tunda leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. "Because some men build their success on lies," he said. "And sooner or later, those lies have consequences." McKenna stared at him. A chill ran down her spine. Because suddenly, the kindness, the timing, the knowledge, it all felt connected, calculated, intentional. And for the first time since meeting him, McKenna realized something unsettling. Tunda hadn't just appeared in her life. He had entered it with purpose. The word lingered long after Tunda said it. Purpose. It settled into the space between them like a quiet storm, unseen but impossible to ignore. McKenna didn't speak right away. She studied him. Really studied him. The calm posture, the controlled breathing, the way his eyes held steady, never rushing to explain, never scrambling to soften what he had just revealed. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't apologetic. That made it worse. "You've been watching, Jabari," she repeated slowly. Tunda nodded once. "For how long a while?" That's not an answer. A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Then long enough to know what kind of man he became. McKenna's chest tightened. Became, she echoed. Or always was. Tunda didn't respond immediately. And in that pause, McKenna felt the first crack of anger rise again. Not at Jabari this time. At Tunde. Because suddenly his silence felt like control. Like he was holding pieces of a story she had lived, but never fully understood. "You knew," she said, her voice sharpening. "You knew what happened to me. I knew parts of it, and you said nothing." Tunde leaned forward slightly. His tone still calm, but firmer now. "Would you have believed me?" McKenna opened her mouth, then stopped. Because the answer painfully was no. Back then she had been drowning in heartbreak, confusion, survival. If a stranger had walked up to her with truths about manipulation, deception, hidden motives, she would have rejected it, clung to her pain, clung to what she thought she knew. Her silence confirmed it. Tunda nodded faintly. Exactly. McKenna looked away. Frustration twisted inside her. Then why now, she asked quietly. Why tell me this now? Tunda's gaze didn't leave her. Because you're no longer the same woman who collapsed on that market floor. McKenna felt that. The truth of it. She wasn't the same. Not the woman who begged, not the woman who waited, not the woman who believed love alone was enough to protect her. But still. You're not answering the real question, she said. And what is that? Why do you care? This time Tunda didn't respond immediately, and this silence felt different. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, as if weighing how much of the truth to release. Then because I knew what he was doing, before you did. McKenna's heart skipped. What do you mean? Tunda's eyes darkened slightly. I was there, he said. The world seemed to tilt. Where at the beginning? McKenna's pulse quickened. Her mind raced, pieces shifting, aligning, breaking apart again. You knew, Jabari. Before all of this, she asked. Tunda nodded. We crossed paths in business circles, before he met Zuri. And I saw the potential in him, Tunda said. But I also saw something else. What a hunger that wasn't grounded. McKenna frowned. He wanted more, she said defensively. There's nothing wrong with that. Tunda's gaze sharpened slightly. There's nothing wrong with wanting more, but there's everything wrong with wanting it at the cost of who you are. The words hit harder than she expected, because deep down she knew. Jabari hadn't just wanted success. He had wanted escape. From struggle, from responsibility, from her, Tunda. McKenna's voice softened, but tension remained. You're still not telling me everything. I know. Then tell me. Silence. Then I warned him, Tunda said. McKenna blinked. What I told him Zuri wasn't who she pretended to be. Her breath caught. And he didn't listen. Tunda gave a small, humorless smile. Men rarely listen when the lie they're being told sounds better than the truth. McKenna looked down, her fingers tightening slightly in her lap. So you just watched him destroy everything? She asked, her voice trembling again, this time with something deeper than anger. Regret. Tunda didn't look away. I tried to intervene, he said quietly. More than once. McKenna's head snapped up. How I questioned the deals he was getting into. I challenged Zuri's influence. I even tried to reach you. Her eyes widened. What? Tunda's jaw tightened slightly. You never received anything. McKenna shook her head slowly. No. A realization began to form. Cold, sharp. Zuri, she whispered. Tunda nodded. She controlled access to him, to his communications, to anything that could threaten her position. McKenna's stomach dropped. So all this time, she said, barely audible, I thought no one knew, that no one tried to help. They did, Tunda said gently. You were just never allowed to see it. The room fell silent. But this silence was not empty. It was full of truth, heavy truth, the kind that doesn't scream. It settles and changes everything. McKenna leaned back slowly, her mind struggling to keep up. So why didn't you come find me directly? She asked. Tunda's expression shifted just slightly. Because by the time I realized how far things had gone, he said you were already gone. Her chest tightened again. Gone. Disappeared into survival, into silence, into a life no one was looking for. Except him. McKenna studied him again. But now everything looked different. The help, the timing, the knowledge. You didn't just find me in the market, she said quietly. Tunda held her gaze. No. The truth landed. Hard. You were looking for me. Yes. Why this time there was no pause? Because someone needed to make sure you didn't disappear completely. McKenna's throat tightened. And why would that matter to you? Tunde's answer came softer now, but more dangerous. Because you were never the problem. Her eyes burned, not with tears, but with something deeper. Validation. After years of questioning herself, blaming herself, doubting her worth. Those words hit like light breaking through darkness. But with that light came a shadow, a new question, one that made her uneasy. Tunde, she said slowly, what exactly are you planning? He didn't flinch. Planning. You didn't just help me out of kindness, she said. You didn't just watch Jabari out of curiosity. Her voice dropped. There's something else. Tunda didn't deny it, didn't soften it, didn't hide it. Yes, he said. McKenna's heart pounded. What is it? A long pause. Then the truth isn't finished revealing itself yet. A chill ran through her. What does that mean? Tunda leaned forward slightly, his voice low now. Everything you know so far is only the beginning. McKenna's breath caught. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It wasn't just about Jabari. Or Zuri, or even her. It was bigger, deeper, more dangerous. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, brushing against the windows. Inside, something shifted. Not in the room. In McKenna. Because for the first time since everything fell apart, she wasn't just reacting to the past, she was stepping toward something unknown, something that could change everything. And somewhere far from where they sat, Jabari was staring at a document he had just uncovered, his hands shaking, his face pale, because printed clearly in black and white was proof, not just of Zuri's lies, but of something far worse, something that connected him. Zuri. And Tunda. And when the truth finally came together, none of them would walk away unchanged. Jabari had always believed that success would feel like power. Instead, it felt like a cage. The penthouse overlooked the city. Glass walls, endless skyline, lights stretching into the distance, like promises finally kept. 10 years ago, this view would have taken his breath away. Now he barely looked at it, because beauty means nothing when you cannot breathe inside it. Where are you going? Zuri's voice cut through the silence behind him. Jabari paused near the door, his hand still resting on the handle. He didn't turn around immediately. Out, he said flatly. For what a meeting? Zuri laughed softly. Not amused, not surprised, just dismissive. You don't have meetings without me anymore. That sentence said everything. Jabari turned slowly. Zuri stood near the bar, a glass of wine in her hand, dressed in dark silk that hugged her frame like armor. Every movement she made was deliberate, every glance calculated. She didn't look like a wife. She looked like a strategist guarding an asset. I built those connections too, Jabari said, keeping his voice controlled. Zuri tilted her head slightly. No, you were introduced to them. A subtle difference. A devastating truth. Jabari's jaw tightened. There was a time when he admired that sharpness in her, that dominance, that clarity. Now it suffocated him. Their marriage had never been built on love. It had been built on momentum, on shared ambition, on the illusion that power could replace connection. And like all illusions, it eventually cracked. At first, the signs were small. Zuri began making decisions without consulting him. Then she began correcting him in meetings. Then interrupting. Then overriding. Until one day he realized he was no longer her partner. He was her extension. "You've been distracted lately," Zuri said, taking a slow sip of wine. Jabari didn't answer, because she wasn't wrong. Since seeing McKenna again, everything had shifted. The gala, her presence, the boy, Kato, that face, that impossible resemblance. It haunted him, followed him, sat beside him in meetings, watched him in mirrors, reminded him that the past he had buried wasn't dead. "You saw her, didn't you?" Jabari froze. Zuri smiled faintly. "Your silence is confirmation." His voice dropped. "You already knew." "Of course I did." The room felt colder. How he asked. Zuri shrugged lightly. "I keep track of things that matter. And she matters." Zuri's eyes flickered. "Only because she clearly still matters to you." The truth landed. Hard. Jabari didn't deny it. Couldn't, because denial had become exhausting. "She has a child," he said quietly. Zuri's expression didn't change. "I noticed. He looks like me." A pause. Then Zuri laughed. This time sharper, crueler. "Men always see themselves in everything they regret." Jabari's fists clenched. "This isn't regret," he said. "This is guilt," Zuri cut in. "Or fear silence." Because it was both. Zuri set her glass down slowly. "You made a choice 10 years ago," she said, her voice now colder. "Don't pretend it wasn't yours." Jabari looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time, he didn't see power. He saw something else. Control. Manipulation. "And you helped me make it," he said. Zuri smiled faintly. "I made it easier." The same words, the same tone, the same cold truth from the video. Jabari stepped closer. Why, he asked. Zuri didn't flinch. "Because you were valuable," she said simply, "and misdirected. I had a family. You had potential." The air tightened. "And you decided I couldn't have both," he pressed. Zuri's gaze hardened slightly. "Men like you don't rise by holding on to weakness." The word hit him. Weakness. McKenna. His child. Reduced to that. Something inside him snapped. "Don't," he said sharply. Zuri raised an eyebrow. "Don't what?" "Don't talk about them like that." A flicker of surprise crossed her face. Small, but real. Because this resistance was new. Zuri walked closer, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. "Careful, Jabari," she said, her voice lowering. "You're starting to sound emotional." He didn't back away. "For the first time in 10 years, he said, I am." The silence that followed was heavy, dangerous, because emotion is unpredictable. And Zuri hated unpredictability. "You think she's better off without you?" Zuri asked suddenly. Jabari didn't answer. Because he didn't know. That was the truth. The most painful one. "You think she built whatever life she has now because of strength?" Zuri continued. Jabari's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" Zuri smiled. Slow. Measured. "People don't just rise like that, Jabari." A pause. "They're helped." His heart skipped. By who Zuri turned away, picking up her glass again. "That's the interesting part," she said lightly. Jabari felt it. That shift again. The same one from the document he had seen earlier. The same name. The same connection. Tunde. "Do you know him?" Jabari asked. Zuri didn't turn around, but her grip on the glass tightened just slightly. Enough. That was all he needed. "You do," he said. Zuri exhaled slowly, then turned back. Yes. The word dropped like a stone. How, Jabari demanded. Zuri studied him. For a long moment. Then, you really don't remember, do you? She said softly. Jabari's chest tightened. Remember what Zuri stepped closer. Close enough that her voice barely rose above a whisper. You weren't the only one being watched back then. The world seemed to tilt. What are you talking about? Zuri's eyes locked onto his, dark, knowing, dangerous. There were always more players on the board than you realized. Jabari's mind raced, pieces moving, connecting, breaking apart again. Tunde, he said slowly. Zuri didn't deny it, didn't confirm it, just smiled. And that smile was worse than any answer. You should ask yourself one question, she said. Jabari's voice was tight. What question? Zuri leaned in slightly. Why would a man like Tunde help a woman like Makena? For 10 years, the words hit. Hard, because suddenly everything shifted, again. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It wasn't just about lies. It was about intention, hidden motives, long games. Jabari stepped back, his breath uneven now. What did you do? He asked. Zuri's smile faded slightly. Careful, she said. You're starting to look where you shouldn't. And what happens if I do? Silence. Then Zuri's voice dropped. Cold, final. Then you might discover that you were never the one in control. Jabari turned away, because for the first time he felt it clearly. The fear, not of losing power, not of losing status, but of realizing he had been a piece, moved, positioned, used, and somewhere else in the city, Makena stood by the window holding Kato close, unaware that the truth she had just begun to uncover was far more complicated than she imagined, because the man who saved her might also be the man who changed everything from the beginning. And when those truths collided, no one would be innocent. Jabari did not sleep that night. The penthouse remained quiet around him, polished and expensive and sterile, but inside his mind, everything was loud. Zuri's words, Tunde's name, Makena's face, the boy's eyes. Every thought collided with the next, until dawn leaked pale and cold through the glass walls, and found him still sitting in the dark, a file open on the table in front of him. He had looked at the document so many times, the pages had begun to feel unreal. Bank transfers, old email records, a shell company he did not recognize, a consultancy contract signed nearly 10 years earlier. And on one of those pages, buried beneath numbers and legal language, was a name that refused to leave him alone. Tunde Adewale. Jabari stared at it until the letters seemed to blur. He should have felt anger first, but what came instead was dread. Because documents do not gossip. They do not manipulate with perfume and soft voices. They sit there quietly holding facts that no one can seduce away. And the fact staring back at him was simple. Tunde had been closer to the beginning than Jabari had ever known. By 8 o'clock, Jabari was in his private office downtown, ignoring calls, cancelling meetings, locking the door behind him. The city buzzed beyond the tinted glass, but he heard none of it. He spread the papers across his desk with the obsessive care of a man trying to reconstruct his own ruin. The contract was dated 3 months before he left Makena. A strategic advisory agreement between one of Zuri's companies and an outside risk analyst. Tunde. At the time, Jabari had barely known the man. He remembered brief encounters, a few sharp conversations at business events. One warning, maybe two. Tunde had seemed controlled, observant, difficult to impress. Not the kind of man who wasted words. Back then, Jabari had dismissed him. Now his heartbeat thudded in his throat as he picked up another page. A chain of internal emails. Most were heavily redacted, but one line remained visible. Potential reputational threat linked to subject's domestic ties. Recommend acceleration. Domestic ties. Makena. Jabari's hand tightened on the paper. Acceleration. He leaned back slowly, his skin turning cold. He had once believed his betrayal was impulsive, emotional. Ugly, yes, but private. A personal moral failure inflated by greed and weakness. Now it looked different, organized, observed, timed. And if that was true, then the ground beneath 10 years of assumptions had just cracked open again. He called the only man he still trusted from those years. Mwangi, former operations manager. Quiet, methodical. Too honest to survive long in the world Zuri built. Mwangi answered on the third ring. Jabari, I need you to come to my office. A pause. Is this about her? Jabari went still. You knew. Another pause. Longer this time. I knew enough to be afraid of what would happen if I spoke. Come, Jabari said, his voice low and dangerous. Now. 40 minutes later, Mwangi sat across from him, older now, broader in the face, but with the same cautious eyes. He looked at the papers on the desk and exhaled as though a burden he had carried for years had finally taken shape in front of him. You should have destroyed these, Jabari said. Mwangi gave him a tired look. Or maybe I kept them because one day you would finally be ready to see them. Jabari's jaw hardened. Start talking. Mwangi glanced at the closed office door. Zuri was already building networks before you ever moved into her world. She collected people the way other people collect assets. Loyal ones. Useful ones. Broken ones. And me, Mwangi held his gaze. Ambitious ones. The truth stung because it was accurate. Jabari looked down at the contract. What was Tunda doing with her? Mwangi rubbed a hand over his mouth. At first, consulting. Investigations. Risk exposure. He was hired to study vulnerabilities, business, social, personal. Jabari's stomach tightened. Personal. Mwangi nodded. Meaning Makena? Yes. The office went silent. It was a terrible silence. Not empty, but densely packed with consequence. Jabari stood abruptly and walked to the window, though he barely saw the city below. Did he help Zuri destroy my marriage? Mwangi's answer did not come right away, and that hesitation felt like a knife. Did he? Jabari demanded. Mwangi chose his words with painful care. I don't think it was that simple. Jabari turned. Then make it simple. Mwangi inhaled slowly. Tunda discovered what Zuri was planning. He pushed back. Hard. There were arguments. Confidential ones. He objected to how far she wanted to go, but the plan still happened. Yes. Then he failed. Mwangi's expression tightened. Or he lost control of it. That possibility was almost worse, because now Jabari had to face something monstrous. Maybe multiple people had seen the cliff ahead. Maybe warnings had existed. Maybe rescue had tried to reach him. And he, arrogant and eager, had still walked straight over the edge. What exactly did Zuri do? Jabari asked. Mwangi was quiet for a second, then began. It started with surveillance. The word struck Jabari like a blow. She had people track your routines, yours and Makena's, calls, movements, financial stress, arguments, everything. Jabari felt sick. She needed to know where the pressure points were, where you were most likely to break. And the messages Jabari asked, though he already knew the answer. Fabricated, built from half-truths, a number cloned from an old contact, photos taken out of context, enough to create suspicion, not enough to survive proper scrutiny. But I didn't scrutinize. Mwangi looked at him sadly. No. You wanted the lie to be true. That sentence landed with a brutal, humiliating precision. Jabari said nothing, because he could not, because there it was, the ugliest truth of all. Zuri may have laid the trap, but he had supplied the hunger. She had not inserted greed into him. She had merely spoken to what was already there. "What about Makena?" he asked after a long pause. "Did anyone try to warn her?" Mwangi's face changed. A shadow crossed it. "Yes." Jabari's heart lurched. Who Tunde? The name again, always the name. Jabari's hands curled into fists. How he sent information through intermediaries. A letter once, then documents, then a recorded message, and Mwangi looked away. They never reached her. Because of Zuri. Yes, Zuri intercepted everything she could. By then, she was already managing access around you, around anyone connected to you. She understood something you didn't. What, that if Makena ever saw the full truth, she would not come begging. She would disappear. And once she disappeared, guilt would become your prison. Jabari stared at him. That was exactly what had happened. He had spent years inside a prison with no visible walls. Success had fed him. Luxury had covered him. But guilt had never once loosened its grip, and Tunda Jabari pressed. What happened after that? Mwangi hesitated. Then, he severed ties with Zuri. Jabari frowned. Just like that. No, not just like that. Badly, publicly in certain circles, quietly in others. There were threats, money lost, deals buried. He made enemies. For Makena, Mwangi shook his head slowly. At first maybe for truth. Later, he stopped. Later what Mwangi met his eyes. Later I think it became personal. Jabari felt heat rise in his chest. Not jealousy exactly. Something darker. Something rawer. What does that mean? It means, Mwangi said carefully, that a man does not spend 10 years making sure a woman survives unless something in him was changed by her suffering. The words struck Jabari hard enough to make breathing difficult. For 10 years. While Jabari buried himself in hollow wealth and controlled conversations, and a marriage built on poison, another man had been there in the shadows protecting what Jabari destroyed. And suddenly the shame became unbearable. He had not only abandoned Makena, he had left room for someone better to step into the wreckage he caused. Jabari turned back to the desk and picked up the final document in the file. It was newer than the rest. A recent internal memo from Zuri's legal team regarding exposure risk. One paragraph had been highlighted. If subject reconnects with former spouse, and minor contingency narratives must be activated immediately. Particular concern. A possession of archival records. Archival records. Jabari's eyes narrowed. What records? Mwangi looked at the page and swore under his breath. She kept everything he murmured. Zuri. And Tunde, apparently. Jabari's mind raced. What exactly is everything? Mwangi's face had gone pale. If Tunda has archival records, then he may have more than proof of manipulation. Jabari stepped closer. Say it! Mwangi swallowed. He may have proof that your entire rise was built on crimes you never knew you were fronting. The office seemed to tilt. Jabari felt suddenly unsteady, as if the room had lost its center. My rise? Yes. Impossible! Mwangi gave him a grim look. You were the face, Jabari, not always the architect. The truth detonated inside him. Every promotion, every introduction, every accelerated deal, every impossible opening that made him feel chosen. What if he had never been chosen? What if he had simply been useful? A handsome, hungry, upward-climbing man positioned at the front of a machine, filthy enough to need a clean-looking face. Jabari sat down slowly, his legs no longer steady enough to hold him. He pressed a hand over his mouth. All this time he had believed he was living with moral regret. Now he was staring at the possibility of criminal inheritance. What do I do? he asked, and it was the first honest question he had asked in years. Mwangi's answer came without hesitation. You find Tunda before Zuri does. Jabari looked up sharply. Why? Because if Zuri is preparing contingency narratives, she's preparing destruction. And if Tunda really has records... Mwangi's voice hardened. Then the next move will not be about protecting reputations. It will be about silencing people. Jabari's blood ran cold. Makena, Kato, Tunde. Anyone close to the truth. Anyone who could pull the whole rotten structure into daylight. He stood so abruptly his chair rolled back. Mwangi, get me everything you can on Tunde's current operations. Addresses, companies, associates, anything. Mwangi nodded and rose. At the door he paused. There's one more thing. Jabari's throat tightened. Wat Mwangi looked at him with the grave pity of a man delivering a wound he wishes he did not have to inflict. The first time Tunde tried to warn you, he said quietly he told you one sentence. Jabari frowned, struggling to remember. Mwangi spoke it slowly. Be careful which lie makes your pain feel convenient. And suddenly, like a blade sliding cleanly from old flesh, the memory returned. A parking lot. Rain. Tunde's face lit by a street lamp, a warning Jabari had laughed off. Because the lie had been convenient. It had excused desire. It had justified cruelty. It had made abandonment feel almost rational. Jabari closed his eyes, shame crushing the air from his lungs. When he opened them again, the man in the glass reflection no longer looked successful. He looked stripped, exposed, late, and for the first time truly terrified, because somewhere in the city truths were moving faster than he was, and if he did not reach them in time, the woman he betrayed, the child he abandoned, and the man who had guarded them from the shadows might all be swallowed by the same darkness he had once mistaken for opportunity. Makena did not like hospitals, not because of the smell, not because of the white walls, the clipped footsteps, or the cold metal chairs that made waiting feel even longer. She hated them because hospitals had witnessed too much of her pain. The night she nearly lost Kato. The weeks of recovery when her body was weak and her heart even weaker. The quiet humiliation of being discharged with a child in her arms and no husband beside her. So when Tunde asked her to meet him at a private medical center on the edge of the city, every instinct in her told her to turn around. But something in his voice on the phone had stopped her. Not urgency, certainty. Bring Kato, he had said. And please, Makena, trust me just a little longer. Now she stood in the reception area with Kato beside her, his small fingers wrapped around hers, his curious eyes scanning everything. At 10 years old, Kato was observant in a way that both comforted and frightened her. He noticed what adults tried to hide. He listened when people thought he was distracted. He asked questions at the exact moment a lie began to breathe. He looked up at her now. Why are we here? Makena forced a small smile. Just a checkup. Kato tilted his head. For me or for you? Before she could answer, Tunde appeared at the end of the corridor. He was dressed simply, but his face was tighter than usual, his composure pulled taut by something he had not yet said. For all of us, he answered gently. Kato nodded as if that made perfect sense. Makena's stomach did not agree. They were led into a private consultation room. A doctor waited inside a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the calm authority of someone used to handling difficult truths. Makena immediately stiffened. No, she said before anyone had spoken. No tests, not without an explanation. Tunde closed the door behind them. You deserve one, he said. Then give it. The doctor glanced at Tunde, then at Makena, as if confirming permission. Makena's pulse quickened. Tunde stepped closer, but not too close. There is something Jabari requested. The name alone changed the air. Kato looked between them. "Who's Jabari?" McKenna's throat tightened. Tunde answered carefully. "Someone from your mother's past." Kato's brow furrowed. "Then why does he want something from me?" McKenna turned sharply to Tunde. "What did you tell him?" Nothing he didn't already suspect. Suspect what? Tunde held her gaze. That Kato may be his son. The words hit the room like a blow. Silence followed. Heavy. Absolute. McKenna felt it first in her chest, then in her stomach, then everywhere at once a flood of old fear, old anger, old grief, all rising with terrifying speed. Kato stared at Tunde, then slowly turned to his mother. Mom McKenna knelt immediately, gripping his shoulders with trembling hands. "Listen to me. You are loved. Do you hear me? Whatever happens, that does not change." His eyes searched hers, frightened now, not because he understood everything, but because he understood enough to know something enormous had shifted. "Is he my father?" Kato asked. The question sliced through her, not because she had not expected it, but because she had dreaded the day it would finally arrive. McKenna closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them again. "Yes," she whispered. "He is." Kato went very still. The room seemed to shrink around them. He didn't cry, didn't speak. He simply looked at her with the stunned stillness of a child trying to rearrange his whole world in a single breath. "Does he know me?" he asked. McKenna swallowed hard. "He knows now. Why wasn't he here?" There it was, the wound underneath every unanswered year. McKenna's lips parted, but no words came. Because how do you explain betrayal to a boy without handing him poison? How do you tell a child that the man who helped create him once chose ambition over love, lies over truth, comfort over responsibility? Before she could answer, Tunde stepped in quietly. "He made a terrible mistake," he said. "One that hurt many people." Kato's face tightened. "Then why should I care about him now?" No one answered, because the child had spoken the most honest question in the room. The doctor cleared her throat softly. "The test is voluntary," she said. "No one will force you. But if you want certainty, this is the easiest way." McKenna stood slowly. Her eyes went to Tunde. "This was your idea." He did not lie. "It was mine to arrange," he said. "But the choice is still yours." "And Jabari?" He asked for the truth. McKenna laughed once, bitter and low. "The truth. Now he wants the truth." Tunde's face remained calm, but there was sorrow in it. "Yes," he said. "Too late. But still." McKenna turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. 10 years. 10 years of silence, struggle, birthdays, fevers, school fees, scraped knees, sleepless nights, whispered prayers, and quiet victories. 10 years of being mother and father. Now suddenly there was a test, a request, a need for certainty from a man who had forfeited the right to ask. Her anger was justified. But the truth was that she had always known. She had seen Jabari in Kato from the start. In the eyes, the stubborn mouth, even the way he frowned when trying to understand something difficult. She had not hidden the truth because she doubted it. She had hidden it because she feared what it would do to Kato, to herself, to the fragile life she had rebuilt from ruins. "I won't let him hurt my son," she said quietly. Tunde answered just as quietly. "Then don't let him near Kato until you decide he has earned even a conversation." McKenna turned. That answer surprised her. There was no pressure in it, no manipulation, no soft campaign for reconciliation, only protection. For her, for Kato. And suddenly, in the middle of all her fury, she remembered something important. Tunde had never once asked her to forgive Jabari, only to see clearly. Kato tugged lightly at her sleeve. Makena looked down. His face was pale but steady. "If we do it," he said, "does that mean he comes into our lives?" Her heart broke a little at how practical the question was. "No," she said immediately. "A test cannot decide that. Only I can. And one day, maybe, you." Kato absorbed that, then nodded. "Then let's do it," he said. Makena stared at him. You're sure he looked smaller all of a sudden? Younger. But there was a quiet courage in him she recognized instantly. Her courage. "I want to know," he said. The doctor stepped forward carefully. "It will only take a few minutes." Makena reached for his hand. "I'm here." Kato squeezed back. "I know." The procedure was simple, too simple for something that carried so much emotional weight. A swab, a signature, another swab prepared to be compared against Jabari's sample already submitted earlier that morning. Makena's jaw tightened at that detail. He had already moved ahead, already assumed the truth was his to pursue. Yet somehow that anger was now tangled with something else. Fear. Because once truth is confirmed, it cannot be tucked back into silence. It begins changing things immediately. They waited in a private lounge afterward. Kato sat with a juice box he barely touched. Makena sat beside him, one arm around his shoulders. Tunde stood near the window, giving them space, though his face betrayed his own tension. Hours passed. No one spoke much. At one point, Kato leaned against her and asked very softly, "Did you hate him?" Makena stared ahead. "No," she said after a long silence. "I was hurt by him, very deeply. That's not the same." "No," she whispered, "not always." Kato thought about that. Then, "Do you still love him?" The question struck deeper. Makena exhaled slowly. "I love the part of my life that gave me you," she said. "But that is not the same thing as wanting someone back." Kato nodded, though she wasn't sure how much he understood. Maybe enough. Children often understand the emotional truth before they understand the words around it. Late afternoon gave way to evening. At last, the doctor returned with a sealed envelope. Makena's pulse thundered instantly. Tunde stepped away from the window. Kato sat upright. The doctor held the envelope with both hands. "The result is conclusive," she said gently. Makena could not move, could barely breathe. The doctor offered the envelope to her. Not Tunde, not anyone else. Makena took it with trembling fingers. For a moment she simply stared at it. 10 years. 10 years of pain, silence, sacrifice, and buried truth reduced now to a few sheets of paper. Kato looked up at her. "Mom." Makena opened the envelope. Her eyes scanned the page once. Then again. Her breath caught so sharply it hurt. The doctor's voice was soft but clear. "The probability of paternity is 99.99%. Kato was Jabari's son. Not maybe. Not likely. Not emotionally, biologically, factually, irrevocably." Makena lowered the paper. Her vision blurred. Across the room, Tunde closed his eyes briefly, as if a truth long expected had finally taken its official form. Kato looked at her face and already knew. He didn't need the science. He saw the answer in her tears. "So it's true," he whispered. Makena pulled him into her arms immediately. He held on tighter than usual, as if bracing against something invisible. And in that embrace she understood with devastating clarity why she had hidden this for so long. Because the truth did not only reveal blood, it awakened longing. Questions, grief, possibility, and all of that was dangerous. Tunde approached slowly. There's one more thing, he said. Makena turned, protective instinct rising at once. What now? His voice was low. Jabari is outside. The words changed everything. Makena went cold. Kato pulled back just enough to look at her. Outside. Here. Now. Not as memory, not as story, not as a shadow from the past. Real. Breathing. Waiting. Makena stood up so fast the chair behind her scraped sharply across the floor. Her entire body trembled not from weakness, but from impact. 10 years of absence stood on the other side of a door. 10 years of unanswered questions, 10 years of rage, 10 years of survival. Kato rose too, eyes wide. "Do I have to see him?" he asked. Makena turned to her son at once. And in that instant, whatever storms were gathering beyond that hallway, one truth became absolute inside her. Jabari might be Kato's father, but he would never again decide what happened to them. The hallway outside the consultation room felt longer than it should have. Too quiet, too still, as if the building itself understood that something irreversible was about to happen. Makena stood frozen for a moment, Kato's hand in hers, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through her chest. 10 years. 10 years of silence, struggle, survival. Now condensed into a single decision. Do I face him, or do I walk away again? Makena. Tunda's voice came softly behind her. Not pushing, not guiding, just present. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. "I'm not running," she said. "It wasn't courage. It was exhaustion. Because some battles follow you until you turn around and face them." She looked down at Kato. "You don't have to come," she said gently. "You can stay here." Kato shook his head. His grip tightened slightly. "I want to see him." Makena searched his face. There was fear there, confusion, but also something else, a quiet determination. She nodded once. "Then we go together." The door opened, the hallway stretched ahead, and at the far end Jabari stood. For a moment time fractured. Makena saw him as he was, then as he had been, then as the man who had walked away from her while she bled on the floor, all versions layered over each other, none cancelling the others. Jabari didn't move. Because he couldn't. Because every step suddenly felt undeserved. Because the weight of what stood in front of him was heavier than anything he had carried in 10 years. Makena. And beside her, Kato, his son. Jabari's breath caught. The resemblance was no longer a haunting suspicion. It was undeniable. The same eyes, the same stillness when processing something difficult, the same quiet intensity. Except Kato's gaze held something Jabari had lost long ago. Clarity. They stood facing each other. No words, no movement. Just 3 lives suspended in a moment that demanded truth. Jabari spoke first. His voice was rough, unsteady. Makena. Her name sounded different now, not possessive, not familiar, almost fragile. Makena didn't answer. Her silence was not emptiness. It was control. Jabari swallowed. "I know. I don't deserve to stand here." "No," Makena said calmly. "You don't." The words landed clean, sharp, final, but not loud, and somehow that made them heavier. Jabari nodded slowly. "I read the results." Makena's eyes flickered. Of course he had. Of course he had made sure. Because now truth mattered. Kato stepped slightly closer to Makena. Not hiding, but not stepping forward either. Watching, measuring. Jabari's gaze dropped to him, and something inside him broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. The way regret settles into a man who finally sees what he threw away. "Kato," he said. The name felt foreign on his tongue, earned by absence, denied by time. Kato didn't respond, didn't reject, didn't accept, just watched. Jabari's voice faltered. He stopped, because words suddenly felt useless. What apology could carry 10 years? What sentence could undo abandonment? There are mistakes that do not need explanation. They need acknowledgement and consequence. Makena stepped forward slightly, positioning herself subtly but clearly between Jabari and Kato. "I'm not here for your apology," she said. Jabari nodded. "I know. Then why are you here?" The question hung in the air. Not emotional, not reactive, just direct. Jabari took a breath, then answered, "Because I need to tell the truth." Makena's expression didn't change. "You had 10 years. I didn't have the truth then. You had enough." That one hit harder, because it was true. Jabari looked down briefly, then back up. "You're right," he said. "I had enough to choose better." Silence. Makena studied him, not looking for charm, not looking for regret, looking for something deeper, ownership. And now she asked, "Now?" Jabari exhaled slowly. "I know what was done, what I allowed, what I ignored." Makena's voice sharpened slightly. "And what you destroyed." He didn't argue. "I destroyed my family." The words landed, heavy, complete. Kato shifted beside her. That word family. It reached him. Jabari saw it, felt it. And for the first time he understood something that had never fully reached him before. This was not about redemption. This was about impact. "I don't expect anything from you," Jabari continued. Makena raised an eyebrow slightly. "That's new. I expect nothing," he repeated. "But I need to take responsibility." Makena's gaze hardened. "Responsibility is not a speech." "I know." "Then what is it?" Jabari hesitated. "Because this was the part no one teaches you. How to repair something you shattered beyond recognition." "I've already started dismantling everything Zuri built around me," he said. "The companies, the structures, the networks." Makena's eyes narrowed. And I'm exposing everything." That shifted the air. Even Tunde, standing quietly behind them, straightened slightly. Makena spoke carefully now. "You're telling me you're about to destroy your own empire?" Jabari shook his head slowly. "It was never mine." Silence. Because that truth matched everything. "There are records," Jabari continued. "Proof of manipulation, fraud, exploitation, everything." Makena's voice dropped. "And you're just going to hand it over?" "Yes." Why Jabari met her eyes. Because it's the only way to stop it. Makena held his gaze. Searching. Testing. And somewhere deep inside she recognized something. Not the man she had loved, not the man who left, but someone trying. And after that she asked. Jabari didn't hesitate. "I'll face whatever comes. Prison, if that's the cost." The words hung heavy, real, unfiltered. Kato's voice came suddenly. Why now both adults turned. Kato stepped forward slightly. His voice was steady, but his eyes still searching. Jabari looked at him. Really looked. And this time he didn't see a mirror. He saw a boy who had grown without him, a life that continued despite him, a truth that existed without his permission. "Because I finally saw what I lost," Jabari said quietly. Kato frowned slightly. "That doesn't bring it back." "No," Jabari said. "It doesn't." "Then why do it?" Jabari's voice softened. "Because even if I can't fix the past, I can stop more damage from happening." Kato considered that, then asked the question that mattered most. "Are you trying to be my father now?" The hallway went still. Makena's breath caught. Because that was the line, the one that could not be crossed lightly. Jabari didn't rush, didn't reach, didn't claim. No, he said. Kato blinked, surprised. I'm trying to become a man who might one day deserve to be in your life, Jabari continued. Silence. Then Kato nodded slowly. Not agreement, not acceptance, but understanding. McKenna watched all of this carefully, quietly, and something inside her shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but clarity. She stepped forward, closer to Jabari now, close enough for him to feel the weight of her presence again. You don't get to rebuild anything with us, she said calmly. Jabari nodded. I know. You don't get to ask for time. I won't. You don't get to expect forgiveness. I don't. McKenna held his gaze, then said the words that defined everything. You earn everything from zero. Jabari didn't argue, didn't negotiate, didn't resist. He simply nodded, because this time he understood. Behind them, Tunda watched silently, and for the first time, there was no tension in his posture, because the truth had finally done what it was meant to do. It didn't fix everything, but it revealed everything. And now, whatever came next would be built on reality, not illusion. McKenna turned slightly, taking Kato's hand again. We're leaving, she said. Jabari stepped back immediately, giving space. For once, choosing not to take. As they walked past him, Kato paused, just for a second, then looked up at Jabari, not with anger, not with warmth, but with something far more powerful. Truth. And then he walked on. Jabari stood there alone, not as a powerful man, not as a successful man, but as a man who had finally seen the cost of his choices, and for the first time in 10 years he did not look away. Because redemption had just begun. The city felt different that night. Not quieter, not slower, just clearer. As if something long buried had finally risen to the surface, not only in Jabari's life, but in the air itself. Truth has a strange effect like that. It doesn't change the world. It changes how you see it. McKenna stood by the window of her home, watching the distant lights flicker across the skyline. Kato was asleep in the next room, his breathing steady, his face calm in a way that only children could achieve after emotional storms. But McKenna was wide awake, not because she was restless, but because she was thinking. Not about the past, not anymore, about the future. The meeting with Jabari had not broken her. It had not reopened wounds the way she once feared. Instead, it had done something unexpected. It had confirmed her strength, because for the first time she had stood in front of the man who once defined her worth, and felt nothing that could control her. No desperation, no longing, no need, only clarity. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. Tunda. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, giving her the space to remain in her thoughts. You knew he would come, McKenna said finally. Tunda nodded slightly. Yes, and you arranged it. Another nod. McKenna turned. Why? The question wasn't angry, but it was direct. Tunda met her gaze. Because unfinished truths don't disappear, he said. They grow. McKenna studied him. And you thought I needed that. I knew you deserved it. Silence. McKenna exhaled slowly. Then, you've been guiding everything, haven't you? Tunda didn't deny it. Not everything he said. Just making sure the truth had a way through. McKenna's eyes narrowed slightly. That sounds like control. Tunda shook his head. No. Control is forcing outcomes. A pause. I only removed obstacles. McKenna turned back to the window, thinking, processing, because the more she looked back, the more she saw it. The moments, the timing, The quiet interventions. You found me in the market, she said slowly. Yes. You helped me rebuild. Yes. You made sure I had opportunities. Yes. And you stayed, even when you didn't have to. A pause. Then yes. McKenna turned again. And this time her question carried something deeper. Why not suspicion? Not accusation, but something more dangerous. Understanding. Tunda held her gaze. For a long moment he said nothing. And in that silence McKenna felt it. The answer, before he spoke it. Because I couldn't walk away, Tunda said quietly. Her heart shifted. Not violently, not dramatically, just gently. From what, she asked? Tunda's voice softened. From what happened to you? McKenna frowned slightly. That's not the same as staying for 10 years. No, he agreed. It isn't. Silence again. But this one was different. It carried weight, emotion, truth. Tunda stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough. I saw something that night, he said. McKenna's breath slowed. What night? The night everything changed. Everything. Her chest tightened. You mean? When Jabari left, Tunda nodded. I wasn't supposed to be there, he said. But I saw enough. McKenna's pulse quickened. You saw me? Yes. The world seemed to narrow, because suddenly the distance between past and present collapsed. You saw me on the floor? She said. It wasn't a question. Tunda's eyes darkened slightly. Yes. McKenna's voice dropped. And you didn't help me. The words carried no anger, only truth. Tunda didn't look away. No, he said. Silence, heavy. McKenna's chest tightened. Why? Tunda exhaled slowly. Because by the time I reached you, someone else already had. She blinked. Mum and Jerry? Yes. McKenna processed that. Then why does that night matter so much to you? Tunda's answer came softer, but deeper, because I saw what abandonment does to a person. A pause, and I saw what strength looks like when it refuses to break. McKenna felt something inside her shift again. Not confusion, not suspicion. Recognition. I didn't save you that night. Tunda continued. But I made a decision. McKenna's voice was barely above a whisper. What decision? Tunda held her gaze. That if you survived. A pause. I wouldn't let the world bury you. The words landed. Slow, heavy, powerful. McKenna looked away briefly, her eyes burning. Not from pain, but from something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Being seen. You stayed all this time. Because of that? She asked. Tunda shook his head slightly. No. McKenna looked back. Then why? Tunda's voice softened. Because somewhere along the way. He paused. Not from hesitation. From truth. It stopped being about what happened to you. McKenna's breath caught. And became about who you are. Silence, deep, still alive. McKenna didn't respond immediately. Because this was not a moment to rush. She walked slowly toward him, stopping just a few steps away. Close enough to see everything. The honesty. The restraint. The years behind his eyes. You never told me, she said. I didn't need to. That's not fair. Tunda gave a small, almost sad smile. Neither was your life. McKenna almost laughed, but didn't, because the truth didn't need humor. And now, she asked. Tunda's expression didn't change. Now, you decide what comes next. McKenna nodded slowly. Then you're leaving, aren't you? The question surprised even her, but it came from instinct. Tunda didn't deny it. Yes, her chest tightened. Why? Tunda's voice was calm. Because everything I needed to do is done. McKenna stared at him. That's it. That's enough. Silence. Then no, McKenna said. Tunda looked at her. That's not enough, she continued. Her voice wasn't emotional, but it was firm. You don't get to spend 10 years in someone's life, and then disappear like it meant nothing. Tunda held her gaze, and for the first time, there was something in his expression that wasn't controlled, something real. It didn't mean nothing, he said quietly. McKenna stepped closer. One more step, closing the distance completely. Then don't leave like it did. The words hung between them. Not a request, not a command, but something in between. Tunda didn't answer immediately, because for the first time, the man who had spent 10 years controlling variables didn't know what to do. And maybe that was exactly where something real could begin. Outside, the city continued, unaware, unchanged, but inside that quiet room, 3 lives had shifted. One had faced his past, one had reclaimed her power, and one had finally stepped out of the shadows. And for the first time, the future was not built on pain, or guilt, or silence, but on choice. And that changed everything. Life rarely gives us clean endings. Most of the time, it gives us broken pieces and waits to see what we build from them. McKenna's story reminds us that betrayal can shatter us, but it does not define us. The people who leave the lies we believe, the pain we endure, none of it determines our final worth. What matters is what we choose after everything falls apart. Jabari chose ambition over love and paid for it with 10 years of regret. But when truth finally reached him, he chose accountability, not because it erased his past, but because it was the only path forward. Sometimes justice is not about punishment. It is about facing what we've done and refusing to run from it anymore. McKenna chose something even harder. She chose to heal without revenge, to protect her child without poisoning his heart, to move forward without letting the past control her. And that is real strength, because healing is not forgetting. It is remembering without breaking. So tell me, what would you have done if you were? McKenna, would you have forgiven or walked away forever? And if this story touched you, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more powerful stories like this.